Good morning and welcome to the Monday Call brought to you by NZ Funds. I'm Stefan Clark, Chief Client Officer, and in the studio with me is James Grigor, Investment Strategist. Few understand the space economy and the opportunities it presents better than Chris Quilty. As President of Quilty Space, he advises investors, operators, and policymakers worldwide and is widely regarded as one of the sector's most trusted voices, regularly featuring on Bloomberg, CNBC, and the Wall Street Journal. This morning, Chris joins us to talk about the space economy and SpaceX, which listed today, I believe. And I am very excited to welcome you here, Chris. What an amazing sector you work in. I thought we could launch, pun intended, painfully, with you talking a little bit about your background, how you chose to spend, I guess, your working life in this sector, and what Quilty Space is looking to achieve.
Yeah, I would have to say space was sort of a mistake for me. I was a sell side research analyst for Raymond James. Joined him back in the late 90s, covering the small cap defense industry. And then post 9/11, basically every single company I was covering got acquired. And so to stay gainfully employed, I had to figure out something to do. And there was this adjacency called space. And for those of you that don't realize it, there was another big space boom that happened in the late 90s, and all of those companies went bankrupt. Uh, and so back in the mid 2000s, as I'm looking for something else to do, I looked at the space industry and I said, well, this is an interesting industry, and nobody seems to be writing research on it. Of course, I was too stupid back then to realize there was a reason nobody was writing on it because the industry kind of sucked in retrospect. But lo and behold, I spent the next 10, 15 years at Raymond James. We built up a whole business and coverage universe around the space industry. And there were really only a limited number of public companies that existed back in those days. But lo and behold, in 2016, I left Raymond James to step out and do my own thing, starting Quilty Space. Brought over my investment banker from Raymond James as my partner, and today we operate a small firm. There's less than 10 of us. And there's kind of two primary lines of business. We publish research, financial research on the space industry. Then we also do a lot of technical and strategy discussions in what we do. And we do some investment banking work. And we also take on some strategic consulting for customers in the space industry, adjacencies in the government. There are on the Quilty website, there's samples of our research. It is a paid subscription, but there's complimentary stuff we have there and sample reports if you want to take a look at
Fantastic. So today is obviously a very exciting day for the space industry generally with SpaceX listing. Tell us about, you know, the 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 thinking behind investors and how they can support a business like this. It's changed so much; it's grown so quickly, and obviously, it's been given a huge valuation. And what's your take on the industry movement towards that?
it. Yeah. So the interesting thing about the space industry, obviously, with an exclamation point of the SpaceX IPO, they have been the change agent for this industry. Historically, the space industry, and even today, it's always been a dual use uh, government slash commercial business with the emphasis on government. And in most sectors of the business, somewhere around 80% of the revenues in things like Earth observation are derived from government customers. What SpaceX did in introducing low cost launch was they suddenly made different elements and business models associated with the space industry economically viable, whereas they had never been. And famously, they talk about lowering launch costs from $10,000 a kilogram down to 1,000, and eventually, if we move towards Starship, we get down into the hundreds or sub $100 a kilogram. And quite simply, you know, you can't close an asteroid mining business model at $10,000 a kilogram, but it does close at 100 kilograms. And so that's probably been the single biggest lever in the industry. Um, Likewise, the other change I would tell you comes in the way that satellites and space equipment is designed. Historically, it was all built to very high, rigorous standards, extremely expensive and very lagging technology. because of the need to radiation harden and have heritage or proof that it actually worked before people would buy it. SpaceX changed that. The original Starlink satellites, I can confirm, used a solar panel from Home Depot, a scuba tank for the propulsion, and a vending machine cooling system. And those satellites actually worked. They flew in space, and they're not quite using those same parts today, but SpaceX is using uh, general high volume components from the electronics and medical industries, automotive industry, and they're putting it in space. And that has also lowered the cost of doing things in space, whether it's taking images or communications, or in the future maybe mining asteroids.
That's a really good last point, Chris. The industry seems like it's making the shift from the monetization of space as satellites and communications and things, and now with SpaceX and this cheaper cost per kilogram to send stuff up there, there's more you can do. So there's mining, there's building cities on Mars, there's all these sorts of things that are perhaps at $10,000 a kilogram were just unattainable, and now all of a sudden the universe is our oyster. Is that why there's such a big valuation? Because you've opened the market. It's not just shooting more and more satellites up there. And I'm not. I guess it's what it. Who cares what the valuation is? It's high, but that's what the promise is. It's all this other stuff we can do. It's not just shooting thousands and thousands more satellites up there. It's a totally different industry now.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, SpaceX is its own valuation exercise to get to the valuation that they had, and obviously there's XAI and Terafab, excuse me, and other things that come into the that valuation, the Elon Musk premium, and of course all the things that he has not yet unveiled, uh, which is typical of an Elon Musk company, is part of the story we're yet to find out. But even if you look across the industry at companies like, for example, Rocket Lab and Firefly, two other, U.S. public launch companies, their valuations would dwarf, uh, the largest valuation, highest value company in the industry of 10 years ago. And I think that's a fair reflection of the fact that the growth rate and growth potential, for these companies is an order of magnitude of what it was years ago. And to be clear, most of what drives the industry today is what has driven the industry forever. It's technologies that we use here on Earth, things like satellite communications, broadband from a Starlink satellite, or direct to device to your phone is a new technology that's coming out. However, I do think on the back of something like Starship that can launch 100 tons to orbit, you do see more of the space economy, or a new space economy, developing in low Earth orbit and what we call cislunar orbit, all the way out to the moon. And backing up that assertion, you have at least two major growth drivers that have emerged in the last 2 years. Number one, Golden Dome, which I'm sure we can circle back on, but just to say that's a couple $100 billion, $1 trillion program, not all of which is space, but a significant portion will drive activity in space. And the other one, which surprised me, didn't have it on my bingo card, is the shift to the moon. And famously, if you've ever visited the SpaceX factory, they're walking around with Occupy Mars T-shirts, and they're serious about it. But given the fact that the Chinese are trying to turn the moon into the Spratly Islands, SpaceX has been given the marching orders and they're shifting to the moon. We're now targeting monthly, trips to the moon. And once you get that kind of massive tentpole activity driven into space, it's going to pull along a ton of other activity, whether it's, the in-space assembly capability or on-orbit refueling. You need space domain awareness to know what's going on out there. There was just a contract awarded in the last 2 months to 14 companies here in the US to build what are called neighborhood watch satellites, or maybe hunter killer satellites that are out there to guard and defend our satellites against hostile threats. And that was a contract that went from 1.4 to $6.2 billion. They upsized it in less than a month. after awarding it.
Wow. And I'm surprised you haven't mentioned data centers in space, because there's a lot of sort of talk and promise around that, right? And
Yeah.
um, when I first heard the idea, I thought that's completely bonkers. But then as you start exploring it as a concept, it cooling is effectively free, access to energy is high, and data transmission seems pretty simple. So
Yeah, and the other big one is you don't have to deal with the NIMBYism issue, right? Not in my backyard. I mean, even more than getting enough power for your data center, it's getting your neighbors to allow you to build it. We're seeing huge pushbacks, by communities about data centers being built in their neighborhood and using their water and their electricity. And yeah, space avoids all those problems. So I'm kind of I'm a believer, right? But I'm a believer on a time scale. So let me take you back to ancient history, October of last year, um, which is to say, uh, up until October of last year, and again, as somebody who has followed this industry for over 25 years, the number of people talking about orbital data centers were a couple of kooks, right? Basically how they were viewed in the industry. Handful of startup companies really focused on that. And then in October of last year, Jeff Bezos was speaking at a conference on behalf of his company, Blue Origin. And during that conference, he said, the next big thing that is going to happen in space is orbital data centers. And it's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years. Fast forward 2 months ago, Blue Origin filed for 50,000 orbital data centers. So my answer to you is I believe Jeff Bezos, but I probably believe the Jeff Bezos of October versus the Jeff Bezos, of April, March timeframe. So, and again, not to say, SpaceX has shortened that down to, I think, about 30 months is what Elon's saying. And all that, again, contingent on having the lift capacity, i.e. Starship, to get that done. And that's really the key metric.
So tell us what Starship is. Is that the name of the program that is reducing this cost of payload?
Yeah, so this is the massive rocket that I'm sure you've all seen that gets caught in the chopsticks.
I was showing my kids last night, and
yeah.
the whole family was sort of amazed as it sort of comes down and just gracefully lands and,
Yeah.
and then gets collected. It's incredible.
Yeah, and they actually have a new series that they're doing all about the Starship. And in the Quilty house, I have to trick people to watch things about space because they're sick of hearing about it. And they actually watched this video, and everybody was excited and impressed. It's just an amazing launch vehicle. The idea is, and Elon has said this since day one, is space launch has to be like an airline. The entire thing has to be fully and rapidly reusable, and that's what they're driving for. It's astounding, that, almost a decade out now, they're the only ones who have yet proven the ability to do that. The Chinese are trying desperately with multiple launch vehicles to do it. Unfortunately, other than somebody like a Rocket Lab or Stoke Space in the West, there's not a lot of companies that are yet even trying to recover the first stage, much less the entire rocket. Blue Origin does have a reusable rocket. So the reason I mention that as the key, just to give you a sense, a Rocket Lab Electron small launch vehicle can do about 500 kilograms to orbit. A Falcon 9 can do 25 or 30 tons. A Falcon Heavy can do about 60 tons. And the Starship can do 100 tons, going to 200 tons, they say, with version 4. And it's doing that 100 tons with reusing the entire rocket, ostensibly. So not only are you getting a massive lift to orbit, but the cost is essentially the cost of the fuel. So you're talking, several $100,000 of methane and oxygen to power this thing. Yeah, of course, there are refurbishment costs, and there's a $15 billion of CapEx investment that you've got to recover, development costs. But the actual marginal cost of flying the rocket is de minimis.
For us, metric system people, I was working out. So, two, two, 200 tons is 200,000 kilograms, and then on your metrics,
I gave you metric tons.
oh, sorry,
You are absolutely lucky because in the space industry, it's
do they
all
work
kilo-
on metric?
Yes.
Right, so you're in this century, not 5 centuries ago. Fantastic.
There we go.
So that's jokes on me now. But I did a really easy mathematical equation which I used on my calculator, which obviously didn't need to, but we won't tell anyone. 200,000 kilograms times 10,000. So it would usually cost $2 billion to send that up, but now it's if you do 200,000.
100.
Yeah, times 100, all of a sudden you're 20 million. I mean, that is a total game changer, isn't it? And that's the key.
Yep, that's it. But I mean, beyond cost, right? I'll tell you the other issue is access, right? When I joined this industry 25-ish years ago, the number one restraint on the space industry was launch. And it was the fact that it was very expensive and very rare. In fact, it was so rare that the only thing that got launched were big multi-ton satellites. If you had a small satellite that you wanted to get on orbit, there were no small launch vehicles. There were no electrons that existed back then. You could try to hitch a ride on those big rockets with a big satellite, but it was not uncommon for your satellite to sit on a shelf for years before you could find a ride to hitch to orbit. I will tell you, even though we saw record launch activity for 4 years in a row, the biggest constraint on the industry today is launch. And believe it or not, if you want to launch a small satellite, there are no open bookings. Well, there may be some scattered, but like on a SpaceX transporter mission where they bundle up a bunch of satellites, 50, 100 satellites and launch them at once. They do that, 4 or 6 times a year. You can't buy one of those until mid-28. And in the heavy lift market, the big rockets like the Falcon 9 and the Vulcan and the Ariane 6 and the New Glenn that we got to see blow up on the launch pad, in that part of the market, you cannot buy a launch until, again, mid-28.
And is that resources? Is that regulation? What's the constraints?
Well, it's primarily demand. You know, Amazon Leo, which is building a broadband constellation to compete with SpaceX. And then they just spent $11.5–12 billion to buy spectrum from a company called Globalstar for their spectrum so that they can compete in the direct-to-device business also. Well, back in April of 22, give them credit, the guys at Amazon realized that they were going to need a ton of launch capacity. And so they laid out about $10.5 billion commitment for 84 launches. And unfortunately, the 3 launch vehicles, the 3 non-SpaceX launch vehicles that were available were all brand new launch vehicles. And the sad thing is 60% of all first-time launches fail. And even for a company like SpaceX, it took them 8 years to get to a double-digit launch rate. So that is the problem that unfortunately Amazon has been facing. Earlier this year, they had to go out and swallow their pride and buy another 10 Falcon 9 launches to keep it moving along while they're waiting for New Glenn and Vulcan and Ariane 6 to come online and scale up.
I did the numbers before this call. Well, actually, ChatGPT did the numbers. I should concede it. And apparently, SpaceX had 100 launches on average, sort of because rolling average last year, just above that. So they're doing about 2 to 3 a week. And there's some weeks they don't do it. And then, and 20 years ago, so that's just SpaceX. So it doesn't include every other country, the Chinese, obviously the Russians. There's lots of other governments involved. And whereas 20 years ago, there were 70 launches worldwide in total. And so I guess, just in terms of scale. And the other thing that's interesting is that with the SpaceX launches, they're launching, from what I can gather, often I think it was 24 satellites in one launch was, so that enables them, because the satellites are so much smaller, to put, a huge amount of coverage up, which previously wasn't possible. Is
Yep.
that fair? You'd know better than me, probably better than ChatGPT. So,
Yeah. So if you look at something like Cape Canaveral, which is the highest volume launch site in the world, prior to recent history, the maximum number of launches they had achieved out of that launch site was 29 in a year. And I know last year, can't remember the exact number, it was over 100. And the goal is to drive that up to 500 launches. Um, but there's a problem, and forgive me for doing a little technical talk here. But when you launch a rocket, you want to launch to the east, and you want to launch with the spin of the Earth, which is why they chose a spot on Cape Canaveral. It's on the east coast. The rocket goes out over the water. By and large, unless you're a communist country like China or Russia that doesn't give about a crap about the people downrange, you don't want to launch inland. And if you want to see why, go on Google and search Chinese rocket bodies landing on villages. Uh, so we have a problem, right? Which is there's not a lot of good places to launch on the east coast of the US. We have one other major launch site, which is Vandenberg Air Force Base, Space Force Base, excuse me, on the west coast. But they can only launch south over the water. They can't launch east. So Elon has talked about launching 10,000 times a year. Um, there's big challenges, big, structural, physical challenges with doing that. Space launch is disruptive to air traffic control. It's disruptive to people on the ground. One of the beauties of what Rocket Lab did, with their Mahia site is it's pretty unrestricted location in terms of their ability to launch. But there are multiple attempts to build launch sites around the world, including several standing up in Australia. And it will be increasingly important if the industry is to scale to Elon's vision that we're going to need dispersed multiple launch sites around the world.
Rocket Lab's originally a Kiwi company. Presumably that's known in the States, but that's widely known here. We're proud Peter Beck followers. Uh, do you think that there are other sites like New Zealand that can manage or move towards managing servicing rockets in that way?
I think there will have to be is the answer because they simply can't do it at Cape Canaveral right now. To do a normal launch, they have to drive trucks of methane down to the base. Every single Starship launch will require hundreds of trucks driving from Jacksonville, for each launch. And you want to do multiple launches a day, right? There's structural issues that will limit the ability to do that. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing that sort of effort being funded by the government. And unfortunately, this is a government function, right? Which is obvious. Unfortunately, it tends to be the scaling factor. And having talked to the folks who run these sites, uh, any of them will tell you the government should not be in this business. Uh, you, that said, the government is in the business and they are subsidizing it and controlling it, which makes it very difficult for commercial providers to try to compete.
It was under the Obama government, was it not, that I guess the concept of commercialization of launches really came to the fore. What what
Yep.
what triggered that? How did that go? Was that push from industry, or was it? I see the space shuttle behind you, and on the picture, and was it the fact that the demand was there and they just couldn't deliver? What was the genesis for that? I guess a huge regulatory shift.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, the U.S. space program was entirely broken since Apollo. I mean, uh, shuttle, failed one of every 70 launches, which is unacceptable, and it never was able to achieve the sort of low cost reusability that was required. Um, before the sort of genesis happened under Obama, There had been a program called Constellation that was trying, under the Bush administration, that was trying to revive Apollo, and it got shut down by a commission that said it's unachievable. And interestingly enough, the Obama administration really, they got a lot of credit for allowing it to happen, but they weren't very active in promoting the commercialization. Lori Garver, who was his administrator at the time, and she's written extensively about that effort. The timing was right. Elon Musk was on the scene. He was out there driving, the commercial launch industry. And the bottom line, as you pointed out with the shuttle, we were dependent upon the Russians for 9 years to get Americans and our partners into space. And it was a travesty, and we needed to figure out a smarter way to do it. And the initial push was something called the Commercial Cargo Program. So initially, it was just to get the cargo back and forth to the space station. And then eventually, it became a commercial crew program. And NASA has used, they've actually been the tip of the spear in terms of pushing commercial actors to take the lead. And NASA stepping back, with the exception of this monstrosity called the SLS, the massive rocket that NASA developed. That rocket, again, you want a comparison of government to commercial. Every time that rocket launches, it costs $4 billion. I know the cost of a Starship because somebody booked one and we saw it in their financial filings, $90 million. So Starship can launch more than Artemis. It's a reusable rocket, charging $90 million. The government alternative is foregone. So that's all you need to know. But the point is, NASA, having the success of the cargo program, then moved on to commercial crew. It was a half success. Boeing was a disaster, right? Interestingly enough, when that contract was awarded, the viewpoint was the exact opposite, that Boeing had the legacy, they had the heritage, they had the people and the knowledge. And in fact, when NASA awarded the contract, they gave Boeing 50% more dollars to do the exact same thing as SpaceX because they asked for more. And we all know what happened, right? SpaceX is taking crew to the space station and Boeing has not. But from there, they moved on to a program very important today called CLPS, the Commercial Lunar Payload Services. So at this point, NASA had been developing a rover that was supposed to be a low-cost moon rover. Guess what? It went over budget. It became unsustainable. And so they decided, hey, we're just going to hand this out to commercial. They created a $2.9 billion program and said, we're going to offer commercial companies a fixed price contract. We want you to deliver this to the moon. We don't care what rocket you use. We don't care what lander you use. Just get it to the moon and we'll pay you a fixed price to do it. And what it's done is it's created a commercial ecosystem of companies like Intuitive Machines, which is now public and a multi-billion-dollar company, Astrobotic up in Pittsburgh, which just got acquired by, I know what I'm blanking, because just recently, iSpace, which is a public company in Japan. And lo and behold, with the new Project Ignition that Jared Isaacman, the administrator, announced a couple of months ago, we're going to be doing monthly missions to the moon. And thank God we have a program like CLPS that gave us the ability to do it.
Chris, when I think about your role as your former role as a Southside research analyst, and you sit down on a Monday morning and go, I need to write a report about the space industry. I don't know. Maybe you loved your job. Maybe you got writer's block. But like, you have to talk about stuff that you're really positive about and really negative about. What are the things that really excite you about the industry, and in terms of from a financial point of view, and what are the things that make you go, you know what, this is. I'd rather invest in Walmart because this is just all too hard.
Well, Home Depot seem to be supplying
SpaceX.
There you go. Home Depot's a space company. Everybody's a space company.
This is not to get stock tips. That's not what I mean. I more mean like, what's the real crux of the industry from an investment proposition? Because you throw around these numbers, and it's not you. That these numbers are massive.
Yeah.
And yet there's so much failure. but on one hand, I'm really proud of that. It's great to, you need to fail to get success. But on the other hand, man, it's a lot of capital being used.
Yeah. So, I mean, back when I was an analyst at Raymond James, I had a slide deck. I'd go around, talking to investors about the space industry. By the way, don't do this. This was a dumb idea. It had all the reasons not to invest in the space industry. It's capital intensive. It's very long development cycles. You get these very positive or negative binary outcomes, huge government involvement, right? And all those things still exist today. But we've risked off a lot of them through diversity of vendors and whatnot. And what I would tell you is kind of what excites me, and I'll give you an example. Historically, the space industry and the largest commercial part of it was satellite communications, the SATCOM industry. And you think of companies like an Intelsat or SES, and maybe visions back of the first Olympics, being transmitted over TV and satellite TV companies, right? And those companies at their peak were all less than $10 billion in market cap. And the reason why was because SATCOM was an option of last resort. Like if you could not get, a fiber or a DSL or a cable or a T1 or a microwave link or a string and two cans, they're like, okay, I guess we'll do SATCOM because it's expensive and it's clunky and we don't know how this stuff works. What we're seeing today is with the Starlink service, and certainly once the Starship starts launching and their next generation satellites are 10 times more capacity, you will see space, satellite services actually rivaling things like your cable provider. In fact, I'm evidence of that. I live in a city of 250,000 people. I've got cable. I woke up one Sunday morning. I was so pissed off because my cable was down again that I dialed into the SpaceX website, typed in my zip code, figuring I would never get it, right? Because they don't want to put it in dense urban environments. It's supposedly you want to use in rural areas, but lo and behold, they signed me up for $80 a month, shipped me off the antenna. I hooked up, boom, it works great. And the fact that space is now being viewed as a rival. I mean, I don't know if you saw, but all these space companies have launched SpaceX and AST, Space Mobile, and there's others offering this direct-to-device concept of transmitting directly from a satellite in space to your cell phone to allow you to connect wherever you are. Historically, people would tell you that's a crazy idea. Like you can't do that, or the service will never work, or it'll be too expensive. And it does work now. And eventually it may give you this sort of 5G type of experience, from a satellite traveling overhead at 17,000 miles an hour. Sorry, I don't know that in kilometers, but it's a lot more.
Sounds fast anyway.
Yeah, it's fast either way. And in fact, with SpaceX and Amazon going out and buying their own spectrum so that they can provide this service on their own, here in the US, we had earlier this year the big three mobile providers banding together in a joint venture to try to hold off the thrust of competition from SpaceX and Amazon. And for me, a guy who I write about space companies, my customers, the people that I talk to day to day, are space companies, and I've got government customers and I've got my institutional investors. In the last 2 years, the inbounds that I'm getting from are from people who do deep sea fiber, cable operators, data centers, hyperscalers, wireless companies, tower companies that are trying to figure out how is space going to impact my business.
That's fascinating. I'm just thinking as New Zealand, what it would have been 10, maybe even longer, 15 years ago, went through the whole country has fiber, and it was sort of it was a private company, but sort of government initiated. And you just think about the disruption of digging up the entire country to provide broadband over fiber, and think, and then you think about all the towers for cell phones and things in a country like New Zealand's, sparse population, but lots of rural, and all these towers have to go I mean, it's a total game changer from a communications point of view, isn't it?
I saw that particular lines company that put all the fiber down, they're advertising now, and they have a complete monopoly, which when I was wondering, why on earth is this business advertising at this moment in time? So
despite having a monopoly, it's because
despite having a monopoly. Still a great business, but you can see,
disruptions are
Yeah. Well, speaking of fiber, I'll give you another reason to be excited about space, and it has to do with fiber. And this is a in-space manufacturing example. They've been doing experiments on the space station forever, and lots of famous examples of things that have been discovered up there. Most of them are on the life sciences, but there is a special type of fiber optic cable called a Z-band fiber, ZBLAN. So whereas most fiber that you would use, for telecom purposes cost pennies a meter, this Z-band fiber, which is not made out of silica, it's made out of metal fluoride, is a very high bandwidth, very pure fiber that sells for $100 to $300 per meter. And you would use it obviously for very specialty applications like, military weapons systems, endoscopy lasers, medical devices, where you need a really precise fiber. Because the Z-band fiber, if you looked at it under, normal fiber, you look at it under a microscope, it looks like Swiss cheese, and this stuff is pure. So there's a company out in Mountain View, California called FiberSense. I'm blanking now. That took a bunch of Z-band material and took it up to the space station. And I forgot to mention, the reason it's so expensive on Earth is it's very hard to manufacture, and you can only make it in several hundred meters. They took this feedstock up to the space station, and it pulled over a kilometer, I think like 1.2 kilometers of this, and have been able to sell it for $1,000 a kilogram, because or $1,000 a meter, right? Because it is such high quality. And to give you the math on that, right? Does this make economic sense? Let's use $10,000 a kilogram for the transportation service to bring it up. Once you take and pull that fiber and bring it down, well, suddenly it's worth about $7 million a kilogram. So that math works, right? And that works under any circumstance. The issue has been how do we get the up and down going? And that has been an issue. A funny story that comes back to your neck of the woods. Sort of the leading proponent company for that is a company out in California called Varda Space. It's a private company that's raised, I don't know, 300 to 500 million. Right. They have been using the Electron with the photon bus on top to launch to orbit, manufacture, bring stuff down, and then when they bring it down, they sell the data for hypersonic entry data to the government. But the problem is, the first time that they launched that capsule, there were not regulations for commercial companies to be able to do a reentry. And so the FAA actually fought them to say, you can't launch this. And they said, show us in the regulations where it says we need a reentry license. And the FAA couldn't stop them, so they launched it. The FAA wouldn't let them bring it down for like 8 or 9 months. And partially because they threatened to bring it down in Australia, down on the Kookaburra Range. And eventually the FAA relented, and they now bring them down in Australia and in New Mexico. But that company has a pipeline of several dozen of these capsules that they're building, and they're focusing a lot on pharmaceuticals. I think there's an AIDS drug, Avnir, that they're trying to produce. But this technology works, and again, on the pharma side, I never realized this, but Merck, the drug company, half their revenue comes from one drug, Keytruda, which is a chemotherapy drug. And it's got two problems. Number one is you have to take it intravenously, which is obviously a bit of a pain in the butt. And number two is it's going off patent in like 4 or 5 years, right? So Merck had for years been trying to figure out how can we have a different delivery mechanism, through pill or injectable form to make it easier to deliver, and so we can extend the patent. And about a decade ago, they went up and they did an experiment on the space station. Again, after spending a decade trying to figure out how to modify the drug. And in a 30-day trial, they discovered a new crystalline formation that they had never seen before. And it's took them about a decade to figure out, how do I manufacture this crystal in a gravity environment here on Earth, and go through trials. That drug, called Keytruda Klex, was approved last September. Uh, it is now on the market, and I pulled some analyst forecasts. It's supposed to be like a $7 billion drug in the next 5 or 6 years. So, real examples of this stuff happening.
Chris, I can't even get my head around. Well, I don't think my head's even thought about it. And so forgive me if everybody else listening knows all about this, but why is that able to be achieved in space and not on Earth? I cannot understand, like that fiber example, the pharmaceutical example. What's going on up there that they can't do down here?
So there's a couple of aspects of being in space that are valuable. The microgravity, right? Crystals form if there is no set. Like, normally when you're trying to manufacture things, you're dealing with two problems. You're dealing with sedimentation, where things fall down, and buoyancy, where things go up, right? And you have to figure out how to keep things, constant. That's not a problem in the microgravity environment. Like, everything stays evenly distributed. And space is really good for doing two things: very thin and good layers. So there's another company by the name of Lambda Vision. I think they just raised like a $10 million Series A. They're manufacturing retinas in space. Want to cure blindness. They can do, hundreds or thousands of layers of super thin, material to produce a retina in space. And crystals are the basically the working material of any pharmaceutical or drugs. So, or semiconductors. So there's another company called United Semiconductors, which is working on developing compound semiconductors. They've booked space on Starlab, which is one of the five private space stations that are being built now. And their intent, again, the economics there, $10,000 up and, $1 million down once you deliver, semiconductor material.
When I hear all of this, or retinas in space was obvious, but there's so much, and that
I actually know what it does for me, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm so excited. Like for having sort of your Joe blogs on the street, like me, saying, oh, and I'm not saying I said this when we participated in the SpaceX IPO, but saying that 1.75 trillion is too expensive. Well, actually, there is so much already you can do, and that's what we already know. I mean, this is phenomenal if you can start getting payload up for so cheap and be able to do a lot of this even this manufacturing.
I wrote down on my piece of paper here, because I was, after we watched the satellite land, I was doom scrolling, and I saw a drone in China land, bring Uber Eats or equivalent to someone on the Great Wall. And it occurs to me, you've cracked the code when you're at a space station and Uber Eats will deliver you some McDonald's or something. And that's when the cost to delivery ratio is finally there. So, but, the difference between 4 billion and 90 million, that sounds, what I just said, of course, sounds completely absurd. But, if you go again for another decade, perhaps it's not completely unachievable.
I hope not. I mean, the type of stuff when I grew up as a kid watching, Space 1999 and Battlestar Galactica, like, maybe my kids will see that. I thought by now I'd be sitting on some moon base drinking a cold glass of Tang. Hasn't happened. We got to be of a certain age to know that joke.
Is that Cocoon?
So Tang was the Kool-Aid that they actually gave the astronauts on the space station, which was really just sugar and dye. But
yeah,
I don't know. When I was a kid, we drank Tang because the astronauts did.
You said in a conference recently that it's dual use or die. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I said it at the beginning. Like, somewhere around 80% of a lot of the demand that exists today comes from government.
Right.
And unfortunately, all the stuff that I talked about that is going to cause this new space economy to happen in orbit is there were government programs, right? The government has to lay the railroad tracks that the commercial industry can follow behind. Now, that's not entirely true. The satellite communications industry is kind of the reverse. I mean, it's kind of 80-20 commercial. And now actually it's even probably 90-10 or 95-5, just because the satellite side is growing so quickly with things like Starlink and the direct device services and whatnot. But in a number of industries, think of Earth observation or satellite imagery. There were a number of companies like Planet Labs and Black Sky and Maxar, now Vantor, used to be Digital Globe, that were building satellites to do imagery. And I could go back from the 90s and pull forecasts that said, by the year 2000, it's going to be a $2 billion industry. Well, they were off by about 15 years. And the reason why the commercial stuff never took off. And so they've continued to have to lean on government. And with what's happened in Ukraine, with what's happening in the Indo-PACOM region, with what's happening, in other parts of the world, the government has again really been the primary driver. Now, that said, there are commercial sprigs, that have popped up in things like agriculture and energy and mining and oil and gas and insurance, where these products actually drive value. The problem is, up until very recently, in order to be able to use in any way satellite imagery, you had to have a geospatial analyst. Well, guess who the geospatial analyst is today? Claude, ChatGPT, it's AI, right? So they are Planet Labs, which is one of the largest players in the industry. I think on their last conference call, the CEO said, we're doing stuff today that we couldn't do 3 months ago. And so I think the potential is there, certainly on the commercial side. Most people, when they think of commercial space, think of astronauts, and space tourism and whatnot. And yeah, there is an element of that, but it's minor. That's not where the big money is. It's in the ability to make products. And when we talk about space manufacturing, I forgot to note, just within the last couple of weeks, a FAA FCC filing was released that SpaceX has designed their own return capsule that they want to manufacture in high volume for high volume manufacturing and return to Earth of bringing things down. And so, we're getting close to that point where things get industrialized, and that was the problem. Everything in this industry was hand built, bespoke, unique, one of a kind. How long do you think it takes to build a satellite? 3 years. The guys who could build it in 2 years were like magicians. And right now, SpaceX is manufacturing 80 satellites a week on their production line.
Yeah. You can see why the market, and, as James mentioned, we participated in the IPO. The path you need to take a long-term viewpoint, but you can see there's so many opportunities for success and for things. Yes, a lot can go wrong, but a heck of a lot can go right.
Yep.
And when you industrialize and scale, and you have, as they do, thousands of satellites now, and the promise of huge constellations and providing data to billions of people who currently don't have it, it's the promise is real. It's quite amazing, actually.
And I would note, for those that are qualified institutional investors, they can invest in venture capital. That is a new financing source for this industry that didn't historically exist. So prior to 2015 was the year that SpaceX announced they were going to build the Starlink constellation. There were on average less than 10 venture funded deals globally that raised on average like 150 million. In the first 10 days of this month, there was a 1.7 billion raised. And we've been averaging, dozens and dozens of startup companies, and they range from, some being, fairly sedate investments to some that are, you kind of shake your head and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody's trying to do this. But, given what we've seen with SpaceX, never say never.
What an exciting industry to be part of, Chris. Like, I know you're joking that your family gets sick of it, but boy, you must get up in the morning and go, what's going to happen this week? It's what a privilege to be able to speak to someone that's right. You've been patient, because I guess the first 20 years was a little bit slower, but yeah, good things come to those who wait.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for your time. I think we really should let you get back on with your week and have a wonderful. It's been a real joy speaking with you and getting such a balanced sort of view of both the opportunity and some of the challenges and the technical advantage as well, because obviously you've seen so much come through, and hopefully we get to speak again possibly in a few years' time, and who knows what will have happened between now and
in a few years' time. He'll be sitting drinking Tang on the moon. We have to do it in a few months' time.
Yeah, that's right. We'll be talking from space.
Very good.
All right.
I hope so, though. I don't know if my wife's going to let me go. She's like,
yeah, well, it's probably safer than driving by that point. So
that's true.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Gentlemen. It's been a lot of fun.
New Zealand Funds Management Limited is the issuer of the NZ Funds Active Income Series, NZ Funds Active Inflation Series and NZ Funds Active Growth Series, together the NZ Funds Active Series, as well as the NZ Funds KiwiSaver Scheme, the NZ Funds Managed Superannuation Service, NZ Funds Wealth Builder and NZ Funds Income Generator. For further information or to request a copy of the product disclosure statement for each of these, please contact NZ Funds or visit nzfunds.co.nz. This recording is provided for information purposes only. The information provided is not intended as a substitute for specific professional advice on investments, financial planning, or any other matter. Past performance is not an indication of future returns.